This is the story of a scary experience I went through. I am going to tell you everything, just like it happened. So listen carefully. It all started when we moved into a new house. My parents had been saving for years, and finally, we could afford a place of our own. It was a big house, much bigger than what we were used to. It was in a quiet area, at the edge of town. No neighbors close by, just a few houses far apart, and a lot of trees. My parents loved it. I remember the day we arrived with all our boxes. The air smelled different there, cold and damp. The house looked old but strong, with dark wooden walls and small windows that barely let any light in. At first, everything seemed fine. I had my own room upstairs, and it was bigger than I ever had before. The first night was a little strange, though. I kept hearing noises, soft creaking, like someone was walking slowly in the hallway. I thought maybe it was just the wood settling, but it didn't stop. Every night, just around 2 a.m., the same sound started. Slow steps, then silence, then steps again. One night, I got out of bed and opened the door quickly, thinking maybe it was my dad going to the bathroom. But the hallway was empty. I stood there for a minute, my heart pounding. I even called out softly, "Dad?" No answer. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep after that. A few days later, I noticed something weird. In the corner of the living room, there was an old, heavy wooden door. It blended into the wall so well that we hadn't even noticed it when we first moved in. I asked my mom about it, and she said she thought it was just a storage closet, but she hadn't opened it yet because it was locked. Now here's where things start to get really strange. One afternoon, I was alone in the house. My parents had gone grocery shopping. I was watching TV when I heard a click. It came from the living room. I muted the TV and listened. There it was again. Click. I walked over, and my heart skipped a beat. That old wooden door was open, just a little. Enough to see that it wasn't a closet. There were stairs going down. I didn't want to go down there, but something made me step closer. I looked down. It was dark, very dark. The air coming from it was cold and smelled like wet soil. I was about to close the door when I heard a sound from below. It was breathing, not loud, just steady breathing, like someone was sitting quietly in the dark down there. I slammed the door shut and ran to my room, locked it, and stayed there until my parents came home. I told them what happened, but they didn't believe me. My dad said the door had probably just been loose and maybe I imagined the breathing. But I knew what I heard. And that night, the footsteps in the hallway came again, louder this time. Things got worse. Objects started moving. Small things at first. My books would fall off shelves, doors would swing open by themselves. But then my mom's jewelry went missing. Lights flickered. The dog next door refused to come near our house. And then one night, I saw it. I was half asleep, lying in bed. The room was dark, except for the street light shining faintly through the window. I turned over and saw someone standing in the corner of my room, not moving, just standing there. I froze. I couldn't even scream. I blinked, and it was still there. Tall, thin, with long arms that hung down like ropes. I reached over and turned on the lamp. But when the light came on, there was nothing. I told my parents again, and again they said it was just a nightmare. I begged them to move, to leave the house. But they said we couldn't afford to move again so soon. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was storming outside. Thunder, rain, and heavy winds. We had lost power. Candles were lit all over the house. We all stayed downstairs just to be close to each other. Around midnight, we heard it, banging. Not on the windows, not on the front door. It was coming from the basement, that door in the living room. The banging was slow and heavy, like someone hitting the door from the other side with both fists. My dad grabbed a flashlight and walked over to the door. It had been shut since the day I found it open, but now it was shaking. Not a little, like someone was really trying to get out. My dad, trying to be brave, said, "There's probably just wind getting in somewhere. Maybe a tree branch is hitting the house." He opened the basement door. There was nothing. No wind, no tree, no person. Just those stairs going down into the dark. He pointed the flashlight down. The beam didn't reach the bottom. It felt like the stairs just went on forever. And then the flashlight went out. I'll never forget my dad's face. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and said, "We're leaving tomorrow." But we didn't make it to morning peacefully. I woke up gasping, choking on smoke. The kitchen was on fire. My mom was screaming. We all ran outside. The fire department came quickly and put it out. But the house was damaged. Not completely burned, but bad enough that we had to leave and stay with family. And that's when we found something that still gives me chills. The firemen had to go through the basement to check for fire damage. They told my dad, "Did you know there's a room down there? It's hidden behind some old boards." "No," he said. They found an old wooden chair, a rope, and a mirror facing the chair. And written in red on the wall behind the chair were the words, "He never left." That same night we moved out. We never went back to that house. My dad sold it and we never asked who bought it. I sometimes still wonder about that basement, about the breathing, and about the figure that stood in my room. So if you ever move into an old house and you find a door that doesn't want to open or stairs that go into the dark, don't go down, don't listen, and never, ever ignore the sounds at night, because some houses aren't empty, some are waiting. This is the story of something that happened to a friend of mine, Peter. I'm going to tell you exactly what he told me. So sit back, because it's one of those stories that will make you think twice about going anywhere alone in the dark. It all started when Peter moved into an old apartment in the city. He had just graduated from college and was excited to start a new chapter in his life. The apartment was cheap, and that's what caught his attention. The building was tall, surrounded by other buildings, but it stood out because it looked a bit older, like it had a history. Peter didn't mind, though. He was eager to live on his own, away from his parents' house. The apartment itself was small, just one bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a living room with a view of the street below. There were no strange smells or signs of damage, just the usual. Signs of age, creaky floors, and old wallpaper. The landlord was a quiet man named Mr. Dawson. He was nice enough, but there was something a little off about him. He would always give Peter these long, uncomfortable looks when they talked, and Peter couldn't figure out why. One of the first things Peter noticed was the strange feeling the building had. It wasn't like a ghostly atmosphere, but there was something heavy about it. The hallways always felt cold, even though the heat was working. And at night he would hear the sound of something faintly scratching against the walls, like nails dragging down them. Peter told himself it was just the pipes or the old structure settling. He didn't think much of it at first, but then things started happening that couldn't be explained away. The first time he felt really uncomfortable was during the first week. He had just finished moving his things in and was getting ready to go to bed. He turned off the lights and lay in the dark, but as soon as he closed his eyes, he heard something. It was soft at first, like the sound of someone breathing right beside him. He opened his eyes, but there was nothing there. He thought maybe it was the wind or the building making noises, so he ignored it. The next night, the same thing happened, and the night after that. Peter tried not to let it get to him. He told himself he was just imagining things. But then, one evening while he was out buying groceries, he came back to his apartment and found something strange. The door was open, not wide open, but just enough for him to see inside. He was sure he had locked it when he left. He stood there for a moment staring at the door, and then pushed it open. Everything inside seemed normal, except for one thing: the mirror in the hallway. It wasn't there before. The mirror had always been in the living room, hung up on the wall next to the window. But now, it was in the hallway, leaning against the wall, facing the door. Peter didn't know what to make of it. He tried to tell himself he must have moved it without realizing, but the more he thought about it, the stranger it seemed. He went to bed that night, locking the door as usual. But when he woke up the next morning, the mirror was gone. He searched the apartment, looking in every room, but the mirror wasn't there. He even checked the hallway again. Nothing. That's when things got worse. A few days later, Peter decided to invite his friend Mike over. They hadn't hung out in a while, and Peter thought it would be good to get his mind off the strange happenings in the apartment. They spent the evening talking, playing video games, and laughing, but as the night wore on, Peter noticed that Mike seemed distracted. He kept glancing over at the hallway, and every so often he'd look back at Peter, as if he were unsure of what to say. Finally, Mike spoke up. "You don't really mind if I ask you something, do you?" "Of course not." "What's up?" Peter replied. Mike hesitated before speaking again. "Do you ever feel like someone's watching you?" Peter froze for a second. That was exactly how he felt. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. "I felt it the moment I stepped inside your place," Mike continued, his voice low. "I've been feeling like I'm being watched ever since we started hanging out here. And that mirror, there's something off about it." Peter's heart started racing. "You saw it too?" Mike's eyes widened. "Saw what?" "I thought you'd moved it." Peter quickly told Mike about the mirror, how it had appeared in the hallway one day and then disappeared the next. He didn't want to sound crazy, but he had to tell someone. Mike listened quietly, but Peter could see that he was more nervous than usual now. He was fidgeting, glancing around the apartment as if waiting for something to jump out at him. The conversation took a strange turn when Mike suddenly stood up. "Peter, I think you should leave this place. There's something wrong with it. It's not right." Peter tried to calm his friend down, but Mike was already heading toward the door. "I don't know what's going on here, but I don't want to stick around to find out. Just trust me, okay?" Peter didn't want to lose his friend, but Mike left anyway. That night, Peter couldn't sleep. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and then around 3 a.m., he heard it. The sound of someone walking around the apartment. Slow, heavy footsteps that seemed to echo from the walls. Peter got out of bed and grabbed his flashlight. He slowly walked toward the living room, shining the light in every corner. The apartment was empty, but then he saw it. The mirror. It was back. This time, it was hanging on the wall in the living room, just like it used to be, but it wasn't like before. The reflection in the mirror wasn't of the room around him. It was something else. It was dark, almost black, and in the reflection, Peter could see a figure standing behind him. His blood ran cold. The figure in the mirror was tall, with hollow eyes and a mouth that seemed to be grinning, but when Peter turned around, there was no one there. He backed away, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. But then, the figure in the mirror moved. It raised its hand as if it were reaching out to him. Without thinking, Peter grabbed his keys and ran out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. He didn't stop until he was in the middle of the street, gasping for air. He stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at the building. He knew he couldn't go back in there. The next morning, Peter called Mr. Dawson. He told him he was leaving, that he couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. Mr. Dawson didn't seem surprised. In fact, he just said, "I knew you wouldn't last long. People like you never do." Peter left that day and he never went back. To this day, Peter doesn't know what happened in that apartment. He doesn't know if it was just a series of coincidences or if something truly evil was watching him the whole time. But one thing's for sure, he's never stayed in a place alone again. If you ever find yourself walking past an old apartment building, just remember, some doors are better left closed. And some mirrors, they might just show you things you're not meant to see. This is the story of something that happened to my friend Olivia. She's one of those people who are always positive and never seem to get scared. So when she told me what happened to her, I was shocked. I think you'll be shocked too. Sit tight. It's not a story you'll forget easily. Olivia had always loved the idea of living alone. She said it gave her the freedom to do whatever she wanted, whenever she wanted. After finishing her degree, she found a small house on the edge of town. It was a cozy little place, old but full of character. It had a small garden out front, and tall trees lined the property. The kind of house that at first glance looked charming, but if you looked closely enough, you'd notice a few odd details. The kind of house that, on a windy night, could feel just a little too quiet. But Olivia didn't mind. She thought it was perfect. She got a good deal on the rent, and the place was close to her work, so it seemed ideal. Her friends warned her that the house was kind of isolated, but she just laughed it off. "I like my peace and quiet," she'd say. She was excited to move in. The first few nights were peaceful. She'd make tea, light a few candles, and read books. But after a few weeks, things started to change. It wasn't anything big at first, just little things that didn't quite add up. One morning, Olivia woke up to find the kitchen table rearranged. She was certain she had left it one way the night before, but now it was positioned differently. She shrugged it off, thinking maybe she had been too tired and had done it without realizing. That night, she made sure to leave everything where it was. But the next morning, the table was moved again. "Okay, that's weird," Olivia muttered to herself, but she didn't think too much of it. Still, it started bothering her. She double-checked the locks before bed, thinking maybe someone was getting in somehow. But nothing was missing. The house was locked up tight every time she went to bed. Then came the noises. At first, it was just a faint sound in the middle of the night. It was a kind of tapping, like fingers lightly tapping on the window. Olivia would ignore it, telling herself it was the wind or the trees moving against the glass. But the taps became louder. Sometimes they sounded like something was scratching the walls. Sometimes it felt like someone was walking around her house in the middle of the night. She would get up, check the doors, check the windows, but every time there was nothing. No one was there. One evening, Olivia invited her friend Sarah over for dinner. They sat in the living room, chatting about work and life. But as they were talking, Sarah kept looking over Olivia's shoulder. Olivia noticed it after a while. Sarah's eyes kept darting to the hallway, like she was distracted by something. "Is something wrong?" Olivia asked, laughing a little. Sarah hesitated, then looked at her, a bit uneasy. "It's probably nothing, but I keep feeling like someone's standing at the end of your hallway." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She tried to laugh it off, but something about Sarah's tone made her nervous. "You're just being silly. There's nothing there." But after Sarah left, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard something again. This time, it was louder, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, walking across the floor downstairs. She froze, listening. The house was so quiet, the sound was unmistakable. But she was alone. She was sure of it. She grabbed a flashlight and tiptoed downstairs, but when she reached the living room, the house was completely still. Everything was in its place. There were no footsteps, no sounds, just silence. She felt silly, but she couldn't help it. The air felt heavier somehow. The next day, Olivia decided to go out and grab some groceries. As she drove to the store, she noticed an old man sitting on a bench by the park near her house. He was staring at her, watching her with such intensity that she had to look away. She felt uncomfortable, but she figured it was just an old man enjoying the sunshine. Still, when she got home, she saw him again, still sitting on the bench, still staring at her house. She quickly ran inside, locking the door behind her. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. The tapping, the footsteps, it was all getting to her. But what really terrified her was the reflection in the window. It was a rainy night, and the glass was fogged up. She was sitting on the couch, trying to distract herself with TV, when she caught something in the reflection. A figure standing right behind her in the doorway. She whipped around, but there was no one there. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to tell herself it was her imagination, but it didn't feel like that. The next few days were a blur of unease and strange occurrences. Olivia would hear whispers, in the dark, muffled voices that seemed to come from inside the walls. Her things would be out of place, moved around without explanation. And every time she checked, the kitchen table would be in a different spot. The noises, the taps, the whispers, they all started to feel like a presence, something watching her, something waiting. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She called the landlord, Mr. Henderson. He wasn't surprised. In fact, he sounded almost resigned. "I'm not surprised you're having problems with the house," he said in a low voice. "There have been others before you. People come and go, but they always end up leaving. Something about that house, it's been like that for years. I should have warned you." "What do you mean? What happened to the other people?" Olivia asked, her voice shaking. Mr. Henderson sighed. "They say the house has a history. A long time ago, there was a family that lived there. The father was let's just say he wasn't a good man. Some people say he still wanders the halls. Others think the house itself is alive. That's why it drives people away." Olivia was speechless. She had heard rumors about the house, but she never took them seriously. Now, the things that had been happening to her all made sense, and she felt a cold weight settle over her. The next night, she couldn't sleep. She heard the footsteps again, louder this time. And then, the whispering, right outside her bedroom door. She didn't want to look, but she had to. Slowly, she cracked the door open and peered out into the hallway. There, at the end of the hall, stood the old man, the one she had seen in the park, but now he wasn't just staring. He was grinning. Olivia screamed and slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. She ran to the window, but by the time she looked out, the man was gone. Her heart was racing, her body shaking. She knew she couldn't stay there any longer. The next morning, she packed up her things and left the house behind. She never went back, and she never looked back. If you ever find yourself in a house that feels a little too quiet, a little too still, just remember Olivia's story. Because some places, some houses, hold on to the past in ways we don't understand. And if you listen close enough, you might just hear the whispers of those who were never able to leave. This is the story of a man named James, and the strange, chilling thing that happened to him one night, in a place where things weren't quite what they seemed. James was an average guy, nothing particularly special about him. He worked a regular office job, came home every evening, ate dinner, and went to bed. He wasn't the type to go looking for trouble, but trouble, as it often does, found him. It all started when James moved into a new apartment. He had been living in the same place for years, but after a messy breakup and a need for a fresh start, he decided to find somewhere new. His new apartment was an older building, but the rent was cheap, and it was in a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where nothing really ever happens. And that was exactly what he wanted. Quiet. The first few days in the new apartment went by uneventfully. James spent his time unpacking and settling in, getting used to the creaks of the old wooden floors and the occasional draft from the slightly cracked windows. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. At night he would lie in bed, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional barking dog. It was peaceful, or so he thought. One evening, as James sat on his couch watching TV, he began to notice something strange. The shadows in the room seemed to shift ever so slightly, moving when they shouldn't have. He would glance up, but nothing was there. Nothing that he could see anyway. He told himself it was nothing more than a trick of the light, maybe his tired eyes playing tricks on him. He shrugged it off and went back to watching his show. But as the days went by, the strange occurrences became harder to ignore. It started with the lights. James would leave his apartment in the morning, making sure everything was turned off. But when he returned in the evening, the lights in the hallway would be on. It wasn't just the hallway light that bothered him, though. Sometimes, he would find his kitchen light on, even though he hadn't been in the kitchen all day. Again, he chalked it up to forgetfulness, or maybe his neighbors messing with him. But it kept happening. Then there was the sound. It started off faint, a soft tapping, like fingernails drumming on wood. At first, James thought it was coming from the apartment next door. Maybe his neighbor was listening to music with the bass too high. But when he listened more closely, he realized it wasn't music. It was something else, something faint and almost rhythmic. And it was coming from his own apartment. One night, unable to sleep, James decided to investigate. He stood in the middle of his apartment, straining his ears to catch the sound. Sure enough, there it was, a soft tapping coming from the walls. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. James walked from room to room trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the sound seemed to follow him. It wasn't coming from any one place. It was everywhere. By the time he reached the kitchen, the sound had stopped. He stood there in the silence, feeling uneasy. He shook his head, convinced that he was just being paranoid. Maybe it was just the old pipes or the building settling. That night he barely slept, and the sound was gone by the morning. The next day, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. When James looked in the mirror, he would see something in the reflection, something that wasn't quite right, a shadow just behind him that wasn't there when he turned around. A flicker of movement in the corner of his eye. He thought maybe he was just exhausted. Maybe the stress of the move and the breakup were catching up to him. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. It wasn't until a week later that things really started to escalate. James had just finished a long day at work, and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home. As he entered his apartment, he felt a strange chill in the air. It wasn't cold, but the atmosphere seemed heavy, thick with something he couldn't explain. The lights flickered above him, and for a moment he thought he saw a figure standing at the far end of the hallway, just outside his bedroom door. Probably just the lights, he muttered to himself, shaking off the unease. But as he walked deeper into the apartment, he felt like he was being watched. It was as though someone was lurking just out of sight. He went to the kitchen to grab a snack, but as he opened the fridge, he froze. The tapping sound was back. But this time, it wasn't just coming from the walls. It was coming from inside the fridge. James hesitated, his heart racing. He slowly closed the fridge door, and the tapping stopped. He didn't know what to think, but he knew he had to leave. He grabbed his jacket and headed out to take a walk, hoping some fresh air would clear his mind. The streets outside were quiet, the night air crisp, but James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As he walked, he began to think about the building. Who else lived there? Had anyone else complained about strange things happening? James started asking around the neighborhood. One old man he met on his walk mentioned something that sent a chill down his spine. The man had lived in the building for years and had seen tenants come and go. "There's something about that apartment," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "People say it's cursed." James wasn't sure what to believe, but that night, as he lay in bed, the tapping started again. It was louder this time, coming from every direction. He could hear it in the walls, in the floorboards, in the ceiling. It was like the entire apartment was alive, tapping and scratching as if it was trying to get his attention. He covered his ears, but it didn't stop. And then, just when he thought he couldn't take it anymore, the tapping stopped. But something else started. A voice, faint but clear, whispering his name. James. His blood ran cold. The voice was coming from inside his own head, but it didn't feel like it was his thoughts. It was as if someone else was speaking to him, guiding him, pulling him toward something. He bolted upright, his chest tight with fear. He turned on the lights, but they flickered and went out. The room was pitch black, and that's when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking across his living room floor. He was alone. He was sure of it, but the footsteps grew louder, closer. James scrambled out of bed, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed his phone and called his friend Mark, but the call went straight to voicemail. He ran to the front door, only to find it locked from the inside. He couldn't get out. The shadows in the room seemed to move toward him like they were reaching out to grab him. Panicking, James started pounding on the door, shouting for help. But the only sound that answered him was the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears, the thumping growing louder, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Finally, the door gave way, and he stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. When he turned around to look at the apartment one last time, he saw something in the window. A figure standing there, watching him. The next day, James moved out of that apartment. He didn't care about the lease, didn't care about the rent. He left everything behind, his clothes, his furniture, his life in that place. And as he walked away, he knew he would never go back. But every so often, he'll tell me that sometimes, when he's alone at night, he can hear it. The tapping, the whispering, the footsteps. He'll look around, his heart racing, but no one's there. Some things never leave. And sometimes the past doesn't stay buried.